So I had Scott Cullen on recently. We talked about a whole bunch of things, adjustments in particular we finally got around to. And I want to carry on that conversation just a tad. But before I do, I want to show you a video. So let's see if this works here. Okay. All right, it's a little blurry. Oh, I even got some applause there. And this is my other applause. So, let me show you one more video before we do anything else. Picture. Ready? Is everybody ready? I said, is everybody ready? Yes! 1, 2, 3, go. Somebody tried to hit me with that plane. Give yourself a round of applause. All right, so for those of you listening and you couldn't see the videos, let me kind of just sum those up real quickly. The first video was a martial artist breaking some boards. The second video was a group of, almost 400 people or so who had made paper airplanes and threw them at the instructor. Happened to be me. In both videos. What in the world does breaking boards, paper airplanes, and appraising have to do with one another? Come on back and we'll talk about it. Hi, this is Bryan Reynolds. You're listening to the Appraisal Update Podcast, brought to you as always by the great folks over at Appraiser eLearning. We're glad you're here. We hope you're doing well, and we hope you're geared up to have a fantastic new year. We're going to talk about adjustments in just a second, and I'm going to bring a good buddy in, and you guys know him and love him as the Appraiser's Advocate, Mr. Tim Andersen. Welcome to the program, Tim.
Bryan, how are you? It was wonderful to see you beat those poor defenseless boards up. And all I have ever read recently is commandments, but no, I admire your tenacity to learn how to do that.
Oh, that's been a long time ago. But the one thing I liked about the competition in breaking boards, or weaponry for that matter, is you don't have somebody hitting you, because boards don't hit you back, right? So it was a little easier there. Tim, tell everybody a little bit about you. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows you, but just in the rare instance we've got a listener or viewer who hasn't met you, tell everybody a little bit about Mr. Tim Andersen.
Bryan, thank you. Since I retired full-time from appraising some time ago, I've gone into the field of helping other appraisers. That's helping them with reports, helping them with adjustments, which is what we're going to cover today, helping them when they're in front of their state appraisal board, helping them as an expert witness, whether they are the expert witness or there is going to be an expert witness against them. And this is something I've done since for about the last 6 years, something I enjoy very much. And of course, as do you, I teach USPAP. And I write classes, and you and I work together on the board of directors of the National Association of Appraisers. So it's very fulfilling. I thoroughly enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoy the people I've met. Thoroughly enjoy working with the good folks at NAA. Thoroughly at that particular convention. Thoroughly enjoyed the camaraderie that was there, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be of service to my fellow appraisers.
Great, Tim. And I know you got a lot of folks that follow you. You have a podcast of your own. Tell my listeners where they can listen into your podcast.
Bryan, if they go to my website, theappraisersadvocate.com/podcast, it's there. It's on Apple Podcasts. And as nearly as I can tell, somebody translated some of them into Spanish and put them on a Spanish platform.
Wow.
So,
wow. Very cool.
They're out there. So, and I appreciate everybody who listens in and follows me. Thank you.
Very good, very good. Well, as I started this talking about breaking boards and paper airplanes, The reason I did that in the class in Texas, had them make a paper airplane, and the reason I bring up breaking boards is if you utilize a recognized technique, it works. There is a technique to break a board, and it's not that difficult if you know how to do it and you employ those correct techniques. Now, in that video, is a blurry video, but the last board I broke, I punched it, and I got ahead of myself a little bit, and I didn't use a proper technique. I mean, the board still broke, thank goodness, but I also busted a bunch of blood vessels in my hand. Didn't break my hand, but the reason that happened, the reason I injured my hand, was because I didn't utilize a proper technique. It was close. And sometimes close works, right? So it worked. I broke the board. I was successful there. But had I utilized a proper technique, had I used the right part of my hand to break that board, I wouldn't have had any injury whatsoever. The paper airplane, if you take a piece of paper and you design it in a certain fashion, we did that when we were in school, right? And you throw it, it will fly. If you utilize a proper technique, it works. And so I want to talk about, Scott and I talked in the last podcast about depreciated cost analysis, and we'll touch on that again. But I want to talk about other recognized techniques. And Tim, you've got a course on this. It's over at appraisereLearning.com, selecting and supporting your market adjustments. Tell the viewers a little bit about that course and what you dive into with that.
Bryan, you're right. You've got to employ the proper techniques. And one of them is not guessing, although that is quick and it doesn't take very long. But no, that's not one of the recognized techniques. So we go through a bunch of them. And probably the oldest technique, the premier technique as it were, is simply comparing two properties. One has two properties that are highly similar, but yet there is one difference between the two of them, such as, for example, a swimming pool. And then you look at those two, and assuming they're close enough, then if one sold for $130 and one sold for $150, the $20,000 is attributable to the pool. However, and there's always a however, there's an old joke. Two old appraisers got together once for lunch, and one of them looked at the other and said, "You remember paired sales analysis?" And the other appraiser said, "Yeah, what about it?" And the first one said, "I found one." So they don't happen very often. And when they do, it's either because we've done something wrong or because we're terribly lucky. So we've got to look not only at that, but we've also got to look at other techniques. And you and Scott spoke about depreciated cost, something that works because it's based on what the market calls depreciation, not from any pre-printed depreciation tables. And then obviously we've got paired sales analysis. We've got a group analysis where you get 10 houses with pools and 10 houses without pools. And assuming that they are sufficiently similar otherwise, then the difference, be it the average or the median, the difference is the contributory value of a pool. So there are ways to extract from the market adjustments other than going back and pulling out of the file that sheet your first supervisor gave to you 25 years ago that said, here, a fireplace is worth $1,500.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. The paired sales is what some folks refer to it as. It can work. I mean, I grew up in a subdivision called Thoroughbred Acres, and there's I don't know 4 or 5 different types of houses there. So I have a great subdivision full of alike properties, and you can really extract some adjustments or support for your adjustments through a pairing of these sales over there. But man, if I get out in the county, you're not going to have any pairing of comparable sales because you're lucky to have a sale. more or less a comparable sale, right? So let's talk for a second about some of these other recognized techniques. Now I'm gonna put something on the screen. Just keep in mind we have a lot of listeners and not viewers. So run through these each, Tim, if you don't mind. And I'm gonna just put something up on the screen. These are recognized techniques that you can find in appraisal literature. And Tim spoke about the first outer ring. I'm going to go inward. The outer ring, their data analyses. That would be your pairing of data, your paired sales, as well as your group sales, if you will. Tim, why don't you read off those others and just kind of elaborate on those a little bit, if you don't mind?
Bryan, thank you. The next one is statistical analysis. And statistical analysis is wonderful. However, appraisers rarely have enough data to do a legitimate statistical analysis. Basically, to do true statistical analysis, you've got to have 30 sales for every point you want to prove. In other words, if you want to adjust for a pool and GLA differences and site size differences, then you'd have to have 90 sales. And typically, appraisers don't have that kind of data. We don't have that much data. So while statistical analysis works, and there are ways to make statistical analyses work for small amounts of data, that is a far more sophisticated analysis technique than appraisers are typically familiar with, unless they have a background in statistics, and it's fairly straightforward. But typically, we don't get into that. We go with the data that we have. We try to amass as much data as possible, but if you're appraising out in the wilds of Southwest Texas, you're going to have counties that have more rattlesnakes than people, and you're just not going to have a lot of data.
Uh-huh.
Next is the cost-related adjustments. You and Scott already spoke about that, so we won't get into that deeply. But looking at cost new, less depreciation, is one way of isolating adjustments. I personally think it's very good. I am very much a proponent of the cost approach, not for figuring out what a property is worth, but for analyzing what the sales comparison approach tells us, and that's part of cost-related adjustments.
Yeah,
Then
yeah.
occasionally,
I'm sorry, Tim. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
it's possible to take the dollar differences between adjustments. Say, for example, a house rents for $1,500 a month without a pool, and $1,700 with a pool. Therefore, the pool is contributing $200 a month to the rent. And if your GRM was 100, then that means the pool contributes $20,000 to value. So that is one way to do it, but we typically don't use it that much, simply because, again, it's difficult to get two houses that are the same except for one significant difference. So yes, it works, and it works fairly well in commercial appraising. In residential appraising, it doesn't work all that well.
Yeah.
And then the last one, oh, go ahead, Bryan.
Yeah. Let me. So if the listeners want to hear a little bit more on that in depth with the cost related adjustments, I'm going back one. We did a podcast, the last podcast. Just go back one, and you'll hear Scott and I talking about that quite a bit. And Scott has software. It's Solomon Adjustment. It's a Solomon Adjustment calculator, and you can get more information on that. Scott's just a great guy too. I mean, he'd talk to you all day and not charge you. He's just a super great guy. And I agree with you, Tim, that analyzing cost is critical, right? I mean, it's part of the highest and best use analysis. We have to analyze cost when developing our opinion of highest and best use. It's perfect for cost-related adjustments, and again, we talked a little bit more in our last podcast about that. But go ahead, Tim. I just wanted to jump in real quick on that. Go ahead with the last ones there.
Bryan, thank you. We talked about capitalization of income differences. Again, it works, but it's very hard to isolate, for example, something like a swimming pool. It's possible, but difficult. And then the last one is market survey, and that's basically where you pick up the phone and you call 10 brokers and you say, hey, in XYZ neighborhood, how much value does a pool add? And they're going to say, nothing, or $15,000. I mean, whatever. The point is, by going out to the market, going out to market participants, going out to the brokers who work those areas, that's a great way to find out what the market is paying for a swimming pool or a third bedroom or an extra half bath or another stall in the garage or whatever. And that is, see, USPAP doesn't require us to prove anything, but it does require us to support our adjustments. And one support for any adjustment is, hey, I called 10 brokers and they indicated a pool added $0 to $5,000, and most of them said about $5,000 to $6,000. So the pool's nice and the house is young, so I went with $6,000. Now, the fact that it costs $50,000 to put it in is irrelevant, because we're not looking at cost, we're looking at contributory value. Well, that's a way to prove the contributory value. Now, ideally, Bryan, is that you would say the pool adjustment, you'd come at it from two different directions. You'd come at it from, say, depreciated cost and market surveys. That way, you're not basing your analysis on one single source of data. And then, of course, you reconcile it. And, one said 5,000, one said 6. I like 6 because it was Tuesday and I had Mexican for lunch, so $6,000 it was. But the point is, you supported it out of the market. It's not a guess. It's not a rule of thumb. It's not what your supervisor told you 25 years ago. It's market supported, and that's the whole point.
I'll tell you a true story. I was trying to extract an adjustment. The subdivision I mentioned earlier, Thoroughbred Acres. I grew up there. Moved in the house when I was 9 years old. And Thoroughbred Acres is a subdivision that all the streets are named after Kentucky Derby winners, right? Like many of you will recognize the horse named Secretariat. Okay, that's a block away from where I lived. So I was analyzing some sales, Tim, and it was a Gulfstream model, and we got a ton of them in that subdivision. It was the number one house, right? Because after all the agents of production were satisfied, it's the one that left the most money. So it indeed was the highest and best use back in those days when they were being built. I had lots of good data. I was analyzing them, and I was looking at the difference between a 1-car and a 2-car garage. Most of them have 2-car garages. Every once in a while, you'll see one with a 1-car garage. And what's interesting about that subdivision is the house, it's a great subdivision. The problem is the street's not real wide. It's kind of a narrow street, all those streets. And the problem is some of the houses have a 1-car garage. Well, as a consequence, they have a 1-car driveway. So guess where my mother parked and guess where my father parked? Nobody parked in the garage. So Mom parked in the driveway. That left Dad to park on the street. Then there were 3 of us boys, and we each ended up getting a car. Guess where all the boys had to park? Wherever we could find a spot. But it was on the street as well. Finally, Dad added a little concrete. He got up in the what was grass next to Mom's car, but 3 boys were on the street or across the street or down the street, wherever we had to go. But the neighbor across the street, guess what? Their kids parked on the street too. So you already had a narrow street. And now you've got cars on both sides. You literally it's like a 1-lane bridge you're driving down when you're driving down that street, because it's not very wide to begin with. And now the cars are parking on the street, and you literally just have to kind of swerve around when traversing those streets. I think a 2-car garage over there is huge. It's a huge difference, right? And so I had really great data. And I was analyzing, and one was an oddball. And I'm like, well, why is this one such an oddball? And then I found out, it backs to Carter Road, or it backs to the apartment complexes. There were 2. And we found that there was a further discount on those properties. But Scott Cullen called me, and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, you're not going to believe me. I said, I'm analyzing data. I'm trying to extract some adjustments. And I was actually doing it for a course. I was using real live data. I think I was speaking at the summit, Tim. And I was trying to get a comparison for an educational speech. And Scott said, what zip code are you in? And I gave him the zip code, and he said, bloop, here's the cost. All right, what's the depreciation, or what's the age? And he came back and he said, well, I'm right around $7,000. And I'm like, wow. Because my range was like 6 to 9, I think, somewhere in there. And I'm like, good God, no, 10, 6 to 10. I ended up using the 10, right? Because I felt like I had really good data. But gosh, he's in Minnesota, and that quick gave me a number that was within the range of the analysis. And if I was out in the county where I didn't have good data, I very well may have hung my hat on his data, right? So it's incredible how these recognized techniques do indeed help you support your opinion. And like you said, Tim, maybe you use a couple, maybe you use 2 or 3 of them, and then you employ your good judgment in that reconciliation to figure it out. You help a lot of appraisers out there, let's just face it, that have gotten in trouble, right? They've gotten a complaint filed. They're finding themselves answering the complaint and maybe going to the regulatory board in the terms of a hearing. How often do you see that appraisers, working appraisers, your clients, that don't have adequate support for their adjustments?
Bryan, it's well over 75%. Now, let's parse that a little bit. There's a difference between support for an adjustment and support for an adjustment. The appraiser can legitimately say, I went out to the market and the market told me the adjustment should have been $4,500, but that just doesn't seem enough in a hot market. So I went with $6,500. Well, that would probably fly because it's based on the market of $4,500. But when it's the appraiser that says, well, and I can't tell you how many appraisers have used this excuse before the state board. Well, that's the way I've always done it.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't fly.
Yeah.
All that says is that you've been doing it wrong for 20 years. So it's, Bryan, we're under a lot of pressure. Budget pressure, time pressure. Up until fairly recently, appraisers were 6 weeks behind, and appraisers had to work, ridiculous hours to get appraisals out the door. So a lot of appraisers were using what is formally called a heuristic and what is informally called a rule of thumb. And quite frankly, the number may be reasonable, but that's not what the state looks for. That's not what your client is looking for. That's not what a court looks for. It's looking for support. Okay, you adjusted $8,500 for the pool. How did you do that? Well, it was Tuesday and I had Mexican for lunch. That may be the reason, but that's the wrong reason.
Right.
So
right.
you've got to pull that. You've got to pull that out of the market. And Bryan, that comes down to scope of work. That comes down to competency. It comes down to ethics. If a job's going to be tough, charge for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if the client is willing to pay it, thank the client and move on. But don't take a skinny fee knowing full well that you're going to end up paying the client to do the job. And those are the ones that come back to bite you. And the state doesn't care that all you got was $450. The state says, did you do it? Did you follow standard 1? And did you follow standard 2? And if the state answers no to either one of those questions, then the appraiser is going to spend a few afternoons very unpleasantly with the state appraisal board.
Right. Well, I think appraisers, the majority of appraisers out there try to do the right thing. They're hardworking. They're conscientious, and hopefully they're trying to do better in areas where they need a little additional education or help or training. I mean, let's face it, none of us know everything. We don't know it all, right? I have a thirst for knowledge. So when I learn something new, I get excited about it and I want to share it with others. But I'm hoping that the majority of appraisers are trying to improve, trying to do better. And if you are one of those that had a complaint filed and you didn't have that support, use that as a learning opportunity. All right, well, I need to relearn this. I had a lady that reached out to me some years ago, Tim, and she had gotten a Fannie Mae letter, right? One of those certified mail letters from Fannie Mae that said, we've noticed that you've been making $20 adjustments for GLA, regardless if it's an 800 square foot condo or a 7,000 square foot custom built home. Regardless if the sale price was $108,000 or $1.2 million, you always make adjustments for GLA at $20 a foot. Please explain this. And she's like, that's just how I was taught, and that's not an acceptable excuse. So appraisers, if you know that you were taught something improperly, or you're thinking maybe you were, it's time to seek out a new mentor or a new supervisor. And if you're already certified, that's okay. Seek out a coach or someone that can help you along the way, because that's not acceptable. It's not an acceptable excuse. But she was being genuine, Tim. She wasn't, wasn't trying to be malicious. That's all she ever knew. So she used that as a learning opportunity of, hey, I've got to get my education in line so that I start doing this based on proper techniques and methods, and that I can hang my hat on something other than just using $20 a foot, because that's how I was taught and that's how I've always done it. So I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic that appraisers are trying to improve. And right now, while we're a little slow, it's probably the time to invest in yourself. It's probably the time, if you don't have a coach, to maybe get a coach. It's probably time to take a class. Take a class for something other than just CE. It's okay to take a class to learn. And with that in mind, let's talk about what you got coming up real soon here, Tim. On January the 11th, you've got an offering through Appraiser eLearning. Tell the listeners what I'm talking about.
Well, Scott Collin and I are going to be presenting ways to look at funky markets. Okay. In February this year, interest rates were what, 2.5%, 3%.
Yeah.
Then in October of this year, they were 7%, which is over 100% increase. And then since then, they've gone back down to 5%, which is about a 30% decrease. So you can say, well, yeah, interest rates started at 2%, now they're at 5%, and that's still over 100% increase. Or you can say, well, I'm going to adjust my comparable sales up a certain amount. If they took place before interest rates changed, I'm going to adjust them up a certain amount if they took place after interest rates changed. So we're going to basically show everybody how to isolate interest rates and their effect on prices. And generally, they're not linear. In fact, we're going to show that they aren't. And we're going to show different ways to figure out how much adjustment to apply based on the age of the sale. And this will be compatible with what's on page 1 about market trends, what's on the top of page 2 about listings and comparable sales, and what's on the 1004MC form. So this is something that and not only is real estate appraisal education, especially qualifying education, short on this type of analyses, the fact that there may be bifurcated markets, the fact that there might be different adjustments applicable during different time periods of the year is something appraisal education just does not cover until now. So AEL is breaking some ground here with this class, and Scott and I are trying to make it available through AEL to as many people as possible, because we think it's really going to keep some appraisers from getting in trouble with their clients, getting in trouble with state appraisal boards, because they're not going to be assuming that market trends are linear and go on forever. They don't. They're curvilinear, and they start and they stop. So this is what we're going to be showing appraisers how to do, why it's done the particular way we're going to show them, and how to interpret those data so that the value conclusion they finally have is one based on the market rather than rules of thumb, your original appraiser's sheet for adjustments, and the price of tea in wherever people buy tea.
Perfect. January the 11th at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time. I assume that is 10 a.m. to 11:30. It is non-CE. However, you're going to get a lot of great information from Tim and Scott. And Scott said you're going to get an Excel template, right, that they can keep and utilize in their own office. So that's pretty exciting information.
That template is rather amazing, because once you set it up, it's there forever, and all you do is import the data. And when you put the data in the template, bam, there's everything for you. You don't have to do anything. The template does all the work for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the things we talked about, or one of the things we will talk about in that seminar, is the concept of iterations. And it is the fact that we look at something once and then say, okay, let's change it and look at it again. And let's change this third variable and look at it again. That are the iterations. And it is that iterative process that is the analysis that standard one tells us we have to go through. And in many times you go, oh, look, Marshall and Swift or whoever says that this ought to cost $200 a square foot. Boom, therefore it costs $200 a square foot. Well, yeah, as far as Marshall and Swift's concerned, but maybe locally it doesn't.
Right.
Or
Right.
maybe depreciation is going along faster than another pre-printed depreciation table shows. And you can extract that from the market. And with what we're going to show everybody on the 11th, it's going to become rather clear that that extraction is rather straightforward.
Very good. Very good. Tim, you travel around a lot. I want you to let folks know how they can reach out to you. Also, where are you going to be? And finally, and I want to thank you. You're a regular host on our Clubhouse club, Real Estate Appraisal Talk, and you do a weekly program on there. So thank you for your commitment to doing that. I know that's a lot of work, and it's something that takes a lot of time, and I certainly appreciate your commitment to that. So tell people about when you're on there, how they can find you, where you're going to be, and lastly, how they can reach out and contact you.
Well, on Clubhouse, Barry Phillips and I are there Tuesdays from 4 to 5 ish Eastern Standard Time on Tuesdays. And we tend to talk about stuff that might be a little advanced, quite frankly, might require more than a couple of years' experience. But that doesn't mean it's over everybody's head. At least we hope it isn't. But it does mean that a brand new appraiser might be better off listening because we do get into some we get into some relatively advanced areas. Obviously, because you hear it, you can't see it. We can't get into anything very deep, but we do get into some really great discussions on occasion, and those hours just, I mean, whip by. So that's on Tuesdays with Barry Phillips and me. Then on Monday, Barry Phillips and I are there again, but with Trainee Talk, which is for specifically people who are brand new to the business or are just getting into the business or are just thinking about getting into the business. So we've got a rather wide audience. And then from a standpoint of teaching, because uh, uh, I recently celebrated my 70th birthday. I have slowed down a little bit. I enjoy being home with my wife. So while I will teach any place anybody wants me to, I will happily hop on a plane and go someplace. And while I've done a lot of teaching online, uh, I have not done as much in-person teaching as I have in the past, simply because after a while, the inside of one airplane looks like the inside of every other airplane, and the inside of airplanes is not particularly attractive, as you are well too aware, given your travel schedule. But we'll be doing this class on the 11th. I've got other classes that are available through AEL. I'll be making a presentation to the Coalition of Arizona Appraisers in January. I'll be making a presentation up in Ohio in June. I'll be at the AXE conference in Sacramento in April. I'll be at the summit in Las Vegas in September. So I don't get around quite as much as I used to, but I still get around.
What's the best way for one of my listeners or viewers to reach out and get in touch with you, Tim?
Bryan, my email address is tim@theappraisersadvocate.com, and I will happily answer anybody's question, and usually within 24 hours, usually a lot faster, frankly. But yeah, it's my pleasure to help folks out.
Tim, thank you so much for being here today, and we look forward to that January 11th class. And if you guys can't make that, I was told that it is going to be recorded, and you can go back and buy a recorded version of that. But we encourage you to get involved with the live version, because then you can ask questions of Scott and Tim directly during the broadcast. So again, that's on January the 11th at 10 a.m. Hey, Tim, one last thing before I let you scoot. I think you alluded you have a new course coming out. Give the listeners and viewers a little tease about your new course coming out. What's that going to be all about?
Well, at a recent conference, one of the GSE's representatives made it really clear that while they've been rather patient with appraisers in the past, they're going to be less so. And that is obviously now, given the number of quality letters the GSEs are sending out, especially Fannie Mae. So this seminar is going to concentrate on making sure your appraisal is credible, accurate, reliable, and reproducible. And when they are, it's going to be really difficult to argue with the conclusions.
I like it. Yeah, appraisers, let's produce credible assignment results as opposed to incredible assignment results, right? Mr. Tim Andersen, thank you again for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Appraisal Update podcast, brought to you by Appraisers eLearning. I want to pause one moment before I let you go and let you know a dear friend of Tim and mine, Mr. Pat Felvey, passed away just recently. Our heart and prayers go out to his wife, Georgianne, and his two sons, and his office. Pat was a leading driving force in the appraisal profession. He was always optimistic, always eager. I always saw a smile on his face. He had a commitment to the trainee process. He helped the appraisal profession by getting deeply involved with the National Association of Appraisers. He was a co-chair of the trainee committee, and we're going to miss him dearly. Please think of his family and in your thoughts and prayers, and we give Georgianne, his wife, a big hug and remind her of what he has done for the appraisal profession. He will truly be missed, and he will always be remembered because, man, what a guy! Just a super good human being as well. So we're gonna miss you, Pat. I'm gonna have a drink to you tonight, my friend. Rest well. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the Appraisal Update podcast. I'm your host, Bryan Reynolds, for Mr. Tim Andersen. Be safe, make some money, don't stress. Get you a bozo bag like I've got and punch that thing if you need to. Go break a dish if you need to. Or do what Jamie said, run or listen to music and calm down. Everything's going to be all right. Until next time, happy appraising.
The Appraisal Update podcast is brought to you by Appraiser eLearning.